Argument 8. We argue from examples of seducers who have been punished with bodily death or otherwise, as at the command of Moses the prince. 3,000 were slain, Exodus 32, verses 26 through 28, for worshipping the golden calf, that God might that day bestow a blessing on them. Verse 29, and Moses might make atonement for them. Verse 30. Numbers 25. Moses commands all the heads of the people to be hanged before the sun, that the fierce anger of the Lord may be turned away from Israel, because they were joined to Baal Peor, and the sacrifice of the gods of Moab. Phinehas in his zeal turned away the anger of God, in that he thrust through Zimri in the act of uncleanness with Cosbi, a Midianitish woman. And Elias caused slay the priests of Baal with the sword. And Paul struck Elymas the sorcerer with blindness, because he labored to pervert Sergius Paulus the deputy from the faith, Acts 13, verses 8 through 10. The son of the Israelitish woman, whose father was an Egyptian, while he did strive with the man of Israel, and so in passion and malice toward the man, as would appear, cursed God, was stoned to death, and a law was made on it against the blasphemer. Leviticus 24, verses 10 through 14, which is in verses 15 and 16. Whosoever curseth his God shall bear his sin. Verse 16. And whosoever blasphemeth the name of the Lord shall surely be put to death, and all the congregation shall certainly stone him, as well the stranger as he that is born in the land, when he blasphemeth the name of the Lord, shall be put to death. There be two things here to me that proveth this was no judicial temporary law, binding Israel only. Number 1, his God holdeth forth that nature abhorreth, and the sum of the first command written in the heart is, he that curseth his Maker, whom he is to bless, love, and serve with all his heart, should die. Number 2, this law obligeth the stranger, and any heathen to be put to death, if he should blaspheme God, saith it is the law of nature, and obligeth us under the New Testament as being the first and highest sin that nature crieth shame and woe upon. And we are to conceive it was a lawful war attempted by the 10 tribes to go up against the tribe of Reuben, Gad, and the half of Manasseh. Joshua 10, verses 11 and 12, until verse 34, because they set up a new altar to worship, as their brethren conceived, which, if true, certainly was a clear apostasy from the God of Israel. That Joshua destroyed the Canaanites for their idolatry, in Joshua 6, verse 21. I confess will not warrant us to make war and destroy with the sword all the Indians and idolaters on earth, and to compel them to worship the true God and the mediator Christ, without preaching first the gospel to them. Nor can it warrant us to kill every ignorant, blinded papist with the sword. Nor can we deny but what Elias and Paul did against false teachers was by extraordinary impulsion, because the ordinary magistrate would not, as Achan and Jezebel, and could not, through ignorance of the gospel, punish perverters of the truth. But sure these examples prove corporal and sometimes capital punishment ought by the magistrate to be inflicted on all blasphemers, on all ringleaders of idolatry and false worship, as Exodus 32. They forced Aaron to make the calf, in Leviticus 25. They were heads, rulers, and chief offenders that were hanged. The manner of the punishment may be exemplary and determined of God. For the example of after ages, whether by death, for simple heresy in one seduced, which was no ringleader, which I find hath not been done by God in the Old or New Testament, but seducers and ringleaders by the law, such as cease not to subvert the faith of others, should die. Yet these examples clearly hold forth so much of the law of nature as bodily punishment, according to the measure of the offense is due. Otherwise, if Christ have freed false teachers from all punishment external, or that may be thought to work any otherwise than by mere spiritual instructing in all meekness, then by the liberty purchased by Christ they are freed from shame and reproach. For shame and the publicness of suffering is an external punishment, and is another means besides meek instructing, as is clear from Judges 8, verse 7, and from Saul's calling Jonathan the son of a rebellious woman, in which he handled him shamefully, 1 Samuel 20, verse 34, Isaiah 50, verse 6, Luke 14, verse 9. Yea, by this way of libertines false teachers are not to be rebuked nor avoided, that they may be ashamed. Paul may not upbraid the Cretians, and call them idle bellies and liars, that they may be sound in the faith. For that must be contrary to the liberty wherewith Christ hath made them free. And a bodily punishment may be extraordinary, in regard of the manner of doing, when done by miracle, and fire brought from heaven. And in regard of the persons that inflict it, as that which Phineas did, being priest and Elias, being a prophet, and Paul being an apostle, when the magistrate will not do his part, and yet the punishment in the nature and substance may be according to an ordinary law of God that binds us. Paul strikes Elymas with blindness. It is no rule for ministers to do the like to false teachers, but it is a rule for him that bears the sword to inflict bodily punishment upon perverters of the gospel. If this were not Joshua's wars with the Canaanites that were according to a moral and perpetual rule of justice, and binds us, Joshua 11, verses 26 and 27, should not bind us to lawful defensive wars in the like case, contrary to the law of nature, Joshua 11, verses 26 and 27. Because Joshua in these wars did many things extraordinarily, and killed all the cattle and women with child, which we are not to do. The answer of many is, these were extraordinary, ergo they bind not us, is no answer. They were extraordinary in the manner, not in the substance and nature of the punishment, in which the course of justice warrants us. As a rule flowing from the law of nature, though the manner and extraordinary accidents are before us as no obliging law, upon the same ground many argue, the apostles, who were immediately inspired, give out synodical decrees, Acts 15. Therefore elders that are not infallible may not give decrees according to the word of truth. Yea, we say, neither should this be a good consequence. The prophets and immediately inspired apostles preached and prophesied the will of God as the Lord taught them. Ergo, ministers now, though not immediately inspired, may not preach the mind of God according to the proportion of faith. For we think the consequence is most strong according to the word. We are to follow the prophets and apostles in that, in which they followed the law of nature, which is that every ambassador relate faithfully his prince's will, though some have ordinary gifts, some extraordinary and rare gifts, in relating the same embassage. So it is no good consequence. Some by extraordinary warrant did punish evildoers. Ergo, the ordinary magistrate hath not therefore power to punish such evildoers. Argument 9. The express law of God and of nature, written in the heart of all, proveth that the seducer should die. Deuteronomy 13. If a prophet or a dreamer arise and say, let us go after other gods, he shall be put to death. That is no temporary law obliging the Jews only. The text saith, quote, let us go, saith the dreamer, after other gods to serve them. This sin is against the first command, and that immaculate principle of nature, graven in the heart of man, that there is only one true God, and he only to be served. Number 2, it is against the love of God. Verse 2, the Lord trieth you whether you love the Lord your God. If he be God, our love is due to him. Number 3, it is against the fear of God. Verse 4, ye shall fear him. If he be God, he is omnipotent, infinitely great and dreadful, therefore by the light of nature to be feared. And number 5, cleave to as the only happiness of man. Add to these that it is a moral transgression if magistracy and lawful revenging of violence and injustice by the minister of God and government against highest soul oppression be a natural remedy, not a temporary positive salve, as undoubtedly it is. Then sure, he that seduces so should die. First, he speaks of aversion and turning away from God, and that is hell and the extremity of miseries. Second, he thrusts thee out of the way, verse 5, a word of violence. Then third, he is evil and destructive to the society of men, which the magistrate by his office should defend, verse 5. So shalt thou put away the evil from the midst of thee. Fourth, he seeks to thrust thee from the Lord thy God, that brought thee out of the land of Egypt. The word nara is to remove from God, as from an unclean and cursed thing, and it expresseth excommunication, and then to thrust men away from the Lord in covenant with us, that can save from the greatest of miseries, must be the highest of injuries. And if the Lord proved a public avenger against the highest wrongs that can be done in a society, as he doth, then certainly against this. Fifthly, it is a wrong that God would have all Israel to fear a wickedness that strikes at the root of society. And all Israel shall hear and fear, and do no more any such wickedness as this among you. And in verse 13, such are children of Belial. They make all things and persons cursed they come among, and bring on the land. the fierce anger of the Lord. Verse 17. The intrinsical work and end of the magistrate is to avenge evildoing, and so to remove the fierce anger of the Lord from a land, that the people may fear and not do any such wickedness, as is clear from Deuteronomy 13, verses 10 and 11, Exodus 32, verses 29 and 30, Deuteronomy 19:20, Romans 13, verses 3 through 5, and 1 Peter 2, verse 14. Now the false prophet is such as brings on all these evils. And therefore if a magistrate stand under the New Testament, and if there be such a sin now as thrusting away people from the Lord, who hath in Christ delivered us from a greater bondage than that of Egypt, this must be a perpetual law.